When the last petal fell, she knew it wasn't just about the garden anymore. It was about something deeper, something growing in silence, something that had begun the moment he spoke, not with urgency, not with demand, but with a calm certainty, as if nature itself had whispered her future through him. It hadn't been a thunderclap moment. It had crept in slowly, like roots expanding underground, quiet, invisible, but inevitable. She stood there, watching that single petal drift to the soil, remembering words that at the time had seemed poetic or eccentric, but now they rang like prophecy. The air was unusually still. The bench where he used to sit was empty. The breeze carried no scent. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. She felt a pressure in her chest, not from grief, but from understanding. A shift had occurred, and there was no turning back. Her hand brushed against the last dry bloom, and with that touch, she knew the garden had never really been about flowers. You're in Tales of the Watcher, where fates are glimpsed, not told, and every step you take is seen by eyes you'll never meet. The air hums with secrets, daring you to listen. Stick around, subscribe for the journey, and in today's story, Emily didn't come to this town because she believed it held answers. She came because everything else had stopped speaking to her. The noise of the city had become a kind of silence, one that shouted with everything she'd lost. The job that had once defined her, gone. The man she thought would never leave, already gone. And the version of herself who believed in fresh starts, buried somewhere beneath months of numbness. She chose the town at random, a pin on a map, a listing on a rental site. The streets were quiet, the people polite, but it was the park that drew her in, not for its beauty, but for its solitude. And that's where she saw him, old, bent, deliberate in his movements, always tending, always alone. He didn't ask questions, didn't force conversation, but one day, without looking up, he said, "You look like something that hasn't bloomed yet. Not because you can't, because you're waiting for a storm." And in that moment, something broke open inside her. After that day, she found herself returning to the garden path again and again, not always intending to see him, but he was always there, as if the garden itself made sure of it. He never pried, never offered advice the way people usually do. Instead, he spoke in metaphors, strange, vivid truths, disguised as talk about soil, roots, and weather. "Storms scare people," he once said, pruning a bush gently, "but the roots thank the rain." She didn't know why, but those words followed her home. That night, for the first time in months, she cried, not because she was sad, but because something inside her had shifted. The grief hadn't vanished, but it had found a place to land. She began writing his words down. Soon her notebook was filled with them. She didn't understand them all, at least not yet. But as her life began, slowly, to move again, she noticed something strange. Every time he spoke, something in her world changed soon after. One late afternoon, the garden was golden with sun. A breeze lifted fallen petals and spun them lazily through the air. She found him standing by the center flower bed, his gaze steady, fixed on one final bloom, a single defiant flower still, standing tall. She approached, sensing the weight in the moment. He didn't greet her, just pointed toward the flower and said, "When the last flower wilts, something in your life will bloom." He didn't smile, didn't explain, just turned and walked back to his tools. She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just another one of his sayings. She could feel it. This was different, urgent, like he knew something she didn't. That evening she tried to write the sentence in her notebook, but The pen sputtered. The ink bled. Only half the sentence made it onto the page. The rest remained unwritten, as if the story wasn't finished, as if it was waiting. Days passed. The garden changed. The once vivid colors dulled, and petals fell like soft confessions onto the soil. She came every day, but he wasn't there. The bench sat empty, his gloves left on the fence post, dusty and still. Something in her knew he wouldn't return. Not in the way she expected. That same day, her phone buzzed. An email from a program she barely remembered applying to. An international fellowship in sustainable art and landscape preservation. Full scholarship. All expenses. It felt surreal. The application had been a half-hearted effort months ago, but now, the timing was impossible to ignore. She looked up from the screen, back at the garden. It no longer looked empty. It looked complete, like it had given her something. And in its giving had let go. Days passed. The garden changed. The once vivid colors dulled, and petals fell like soft confessions onto the soil. She came every day, but he wasn't there. The bench sat empty, his gloves left on the fence post, dusty and still. Something in her knew he wouldn't return. Not in the way she expected. That same day, her phone buzzed. An email from a program she barely remembered applying to. An international fellowship in sustainable art and landscape preservation. Full scholarship. All expenses. It felt surreal. The application had been a half-hearted effort months ago, but now, the timing was impossible to ignore. She looked up from the screen, back at the garden. It no longer looked empty. It looked complete, like it had given her something, and in its giving had let go.